Hello, folks. Hope you're doing okay. So this one's for human sexuality, and we're going to talk about sexually transmitted infections, okay? And this is a big deal, but you don't hear about it much right now, and haven't really typically. It's not been at the top of the news for quite some time. But we spend about $20 to $20 billion a year on STIs. We spend 20 million. We see 20 million infections every year, or thereabouts. It varies somewhat year to year. But holy mackerel, this is a big deal. So there are psychological impacts too. Anxiety, depression, anger, fears about health, depending upon when one has been diagnosed along the course of an infection. Where'd they get it? All sorts of things come to the fore. At one time in the 70s, herpes was the worst thing you can get, and that remained the way it was until HIV in 81. Yeah. So it's difficult for everybody, no matter what the infection is, yes? Okay. We'll talk about a few. We'll talk about chlamydia and gonorrhea. We'll talk about HPV and genital herpes and HIV, and maybe a little more if we have time. So recognize that bacteria generally can be treated with antibiotics. Viruses cannot. We have treatments for most bacterial infections, but not all, because some have become resistant. We have very little to really completely obliterate viral infections. We have some things that can reduce the intensity of the infections, the duration of the infections, or make it a chronic condition, as in the case of HIV. Okay. So if we're talking about the first thing, chlamydia is the most reported STI in the United States. And most infections, particularly in males, have no symptoms. Now, we're used to hearing this about the coronavirus, that you can be infectious if you don't have symptoms, and we think that that's a big deal. It's not. It's very common, particularly in sexually transmitted infections, more for men than women who are asymptomatic. But women, too, can be asymptomatic depending on what the infection is. So chlamydia, if it's not detected and fixed by antibiotics, is the leading cause of preventable infertility in females. And untreated, it can go on to cause pelvic inflammatory disease and all sorts of problems. In terms of gonorrhea, the species of gonorrhea we have now, with one exception, can be treated with antibiotics. But gonorrhea has one mutation that is not able to be treated. It's resistant to all known antibiotics, and it just appeared a few years ago. I believe it was in the southeastern United States, maybe Florida. So this one is a big deal, you know. But most of the species, again, are curable, thank goodness. The next one is syphilis. That's a bacteria, too. If not treated, it can go on to cause death even, or major organ failure, or neurological deficits. The incidence of syphilis is very low as compared to the previous two. Thank goodness. It's somewhere around 1 to 8 cases per 100,000 people. Louisiana has one of the highest. District of Columbia has, I think, the highest rate. They're up around 25, 26 cases per 100,000. It doesn't seem like a lot, but now syphilis has 3 stages. The first stage is a chancre, a painless but looks like it ought to be painful sore, maybe about the size of a dime. It can be anywhere. It can be on the anus, in the anus, on the penis, in the urethra, on the vagina, or in the vagina, or at the entrance of the vagina, or in the vagina, or it could be anywhere on the genitals of males or females. And it goes away. It goes away. So people say, if they even knew they had it, wow, I'm glad that's gone. Don't know what that was. And Here's the bad thing. Here's the good thing, the bad thing. It's easily treated with penicillin. 1 or 2 doses of penicillin can get rid of it. It's so uncommon that it hasn't become resistant to penicillin. Second stage, though, is some flu-like symptoms, and then you start to get a weird rash anywhere on your body. But then that goes away. And it can be difficult if you're not a dermatologist or know really how to differentiate the appearance of certain kinds of rashes. Can be misdiagnosed or not caught, and in which case it's going to go away and it enters a latent stage. And latent stage, that's where the organ damage comes from, any organs. And if it infiltrates your brain, it can actually cause something they used to call general paresis, which is really tantamount to a psychosis. All of these that we've talked about can be transmitted to children when you're born in vaginal delivery, and can cause real problems, much more so in children and infants, newborns and infants. So let's talk about, now let's see, HPV. How about that one? There are more than 80 strains of HPV, and there's no cure for them, but there is a vaccine for most of them. And there's a lot of backlash from people who are so-called anti-vaxxers, people who do not believe that vaccines work, or they're suspicious, or they want to have the say as to whether their kids get vaccines. We would give these vaccines at one or the other, at age 10, 11, 12, so before the kids become sexually active, and they are very effective. They would decrease lots of misery and expenditure, because it turns out that HPV, if you get the cancer-causing varieties, can go on to cause not just infertility, but cancer. Many of them cause just warts. And so among the varieties, there are high-risk types, low-risk types in terms of cancer, and then dermal warts. And the high-risk and low-risk types are going to cause abnormal pap smears, and you would get treatment for any of those. Okay, so I don't know. This is not the place to talk about fears about vaccinations, but you need to understand that a lot of times what's quoted as to abnormal reactions to vaccines as being evidence that they're not effective or they're dangerous are mostly things like headache or soreness of the injection site or something like that, mild fever maybe. That's your body's immune system responding to them. It's supposed to respond with ways that it imagines it has a live virus, which it doesn't. It doesn't have. So a lot of these statistics are skewed in ways that are not science. They're just sort of made up things. Okay, so dermal warts should be treated not by drugstore things. They should be treated by a dermatologist, because the stuff in drugstores can make things worse, actually. Now let's talk about herpes simplex. That's a virus, and there's many kinds. And HSV1 and HSV2 are the most common. HSV2 is the genital warts, and HSV1 is the oral herpes. But you can't tell them apart, and they're transmitted back and forth between mouth or any skin surface or genitals, and the only way to tell the difference is an expensive lab test that doesn't make any difference. There is a medication, a couple different ones, that can reduce the intensity or duration of the outbreak, which is like a bubbly, itchy thing to start with, and then it goes away. Some people have one and never have another one, but they still have the virus, still can infect others. Some people have 1 or twice a year. In severe cases, ongoing sorts of eruptions. Okay, so this can also be transmitted to newborns. So let's talk now about what do we want to talk about? Let's talk about HIV. So HIV is a human immunodeficiency virus. It was identified in 1981 when a group of men contracted something, they didn't know what at the time, that created a bubbly sort of what they thought was a cancer at the time on the surface of the skin. It almost looked like lymphatically filled blisters that were large, and in fact it turns out to be an HSV8 species. Anyway, so HIV, well, there are big numbers here still of people who are infected with the virus, but most of those don't have AIDS. AIDS is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. This is what you get when the immune system has been destroyed by the virus, HIV. See? And so over time, maybe 10 years or 12 years or more with no symptoms, except in the beginning, maybe flu-like symptoms, the immune system becomes more and more destroyed because the virus actually invades the CD4 cells, which are the master cells of the immune system, and destroys them. And so your ability to fight infection goes down further and further. You start to get opportunistic infections, and it's usually one of those things which ordinarily your immune system would kill off, but you die from one of those. Now we have a cocktail of medications we did not have in 81. They came in the 90s, and we have them in a pretty sophisticated way now. And so now it's considered a chronic illness if you take the medication as you're supposed to, and you use safer sex methods. Okay, but since 1980, just so you know, worldwide, about 35 million people have died. So this is not a tiny. It was really a pandemic, to use a word you've heard lately. So that's an introduction to infections that are sexually transmitted. There are a couple that we could talk about, and they have to do with insects, both a form of lice, pubic lice, sometimes called crabs. They're a little bit larger. They use a kind of insecticide that you would use to fumigate a house or something, in a much lower dose, of course. And then the other would be scabies, which are mites, very, very small, which burrow into the skin and lay their eggs, and they come piling out when they're ready to hatch, and it's intensely itching, particularly at night. These are also treated with a kind of insecticide. Okay, so check the PowerPoint. Okay, read the text. Okay, and watch this video all the way through. Okay, all right, bye.